identify opportunity gaps, and work to create learning spaces that honor the unique identities and lived experiences of every person. Before I go any further, I would like to start our learning event with recognition that we are on the traditional homelands of the Spokane tribe. Today, the Spokane people, despite colonization and attempted genocide, contribute to our larger community. I'd also like to personally thank today's sponsors, Better Health Together, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Providence Healthcare, and Smith Barbary Group for making opportunities for spaces like today's event in our community. A little housekeeping for today. Closed captioning is available. We ask that you ensure that you are on mute and know that there will be time for questions at the end of the discussion. You will have the opportunity to raise your hand or place your questions in chat at the end of our discussion. For the remainder of our session today, you will hear from Michaela Brown, a former United Way colleague, and Resmaa Menakem, who is best known as the author of the New York Times bestseller, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. I want to thank Michaela for stepping into our facilitator role on one day's notice after we were saddened to learn that Alethea Dumas was unable to attend. A little bit about Michaela. She's deeply curious, overthinking, heart and hand lover of people and history. Her background in collective impact organizing and commitment to advancing a world where everybody belongs has led her to serve in many community capacities, focus on advancing individual and collective learning around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Currently, she is an equity and leadership facilitator for Just Lead Washington, and formerly held the position of Director of Community Learning right here at United Way's Accelerate Success program. Michaela, we're so proud of you. Her formal education in history and leadership studies, combined with her passion for multicultural education, identity development, and community healing, drives her work to grow with and cheer on change makers across Washington state. As a multiracial woman, Michaela finds power in the ability to hold the complexities of our interconnected lives and leans on the mantra by Adrienne Maree Brown, where we are born into privilege, we are charged to unlearn any myth of supremacy. Where we are born into struggle, we are charged with claiming our dignity, joy, and liberation. Emboldened by the brilliance of our ancestors as well as modern revolutionaries, Michaela, in her wholeness, seeks to cultivate learning spaces that are relational and transformative. Michaela, please take the lead. And thank you very much all for being here.
Thank you so much. Oh, y'all. I'm so excited and grateful to introduce and be in space, even virtual space, to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Resmaa Menakem. Resmaa is a healer, a longtime therapist, and a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in the healing of racialized trauma. He is also the founder of the Cultural Somatics Institute, a cultural trauma navigator, and a communal provocateur and coach. Resmaa is best known as the author of the New York Times bestseller, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies, and is the originator and key advocate of somatic abolitionism. And he is also the author of the newly released book, The Quaking of America. Please join me in welcoming Resmaa to virtual Spokane. Thank you, Resmaa. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, sis. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, thank you. So I know for this afternoon is going to go by super quick. So want to jump in by starting off with a few curated questions, and then, as was mentioned, opening up a little bit of space for some audience generated ones. But want to start off by, before we jump in, to just be like, how are you?
I'm struggling. Yeah. I was doing good. Whenever people ask me that question, I have a tendency to answer them 3 different levels. One of them is I tell people how I'm sleeping. And so since Saturday, my sleeping's been off. It's been rough. It hasn't been smooth. I've been waking up, um, a lot of protective stuff happening, a lot of bracing in my neck, which had gone away for a while. I've been doing some pieces around that. My eating's off again. And I'm noticing that I'm not letting people hold me. Not physically,
Mhm.
not just physically, but I'm noticing that I'm isolating a little bit more, moving away from people. And I know it's protective stuff. You know, the kind of mental drag I'm also dealing with now, whereas stuff I know used to pop like that, maybe, you know, a couple days before the white terrorist act
Mhm.
that happened. That has, and what happens for us, and we'll get into this, but what happens for us, especially those of us in Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous bodies,
Mhm.
one of the things that happens is that when something like this happens in our own personal realm, or in our personal purview, or in our personal lived experience, it also activates the historical, the intergenerational, the persistent institutional, and then our own personal stuff all combined at the same time. So it can have this kind of drag and oppressive sense of it, or weightedness. And so when and what I used to do when people would ask me that question is I would say fine.
Mhm. Mhm.
I would say fine. You know, I'm all right. I'm fine. I've stopped doing that, and that's part of my own healing.
Yeah.
Is to acknowledge that something has happened and continues to happen to people that look like me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for modeling, you know, what's beyond the fine, right? That oftentimes so many folks have probably been giving this week, especially black folks existing in space and so quickly offering the fine. So thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So again, moving and taking into account the horrific events of this past week in the White Terror, as you said, in Buffalo, New York. How can we understand these historical points and current points in our history through the lens of the work that you lead around somatic abolitionism? Or perhaps a more clear way of asking that question is, what is somatic abolitionism? And can it support us as individuals and communities to understand and even endure these times?
Yeah. So I want to handle that question with a little bit of delicacy.
Yeah, thank you.
Some of us understand what this is on a visceral level.
Mhm.
What has happened and continues to happen to people that look like me happens inside of a structural pigmentocracy. What I mean by that is that we've created a society, or a structure, a system that is predicated on the white body deeming and has deemed itself the supreme standard by which all bodies' humanity shall be measured, structurally and philosophically. If you don't understand that, everything else about this society will confuse you.
Mm-hmm.
That this is a structure that's predicated on the white body deeming itself the standard of humanness, and everything else and every other pigmentation is a deviance from the standard of humanness.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're talking about understanding, some of us understand that notion in an embodied visceral sense because our bodies are the ones that have to navigate it. And some of us don't understand it because their bodies do not have to navigate it in an intimate way every day in the same way. Mm-hmm. And so for me, this idea of understanding in order to navigate has to start with the body. It has to start with practicing so there's a piece that I always talk about in terms of when people say, well, let's just talk about race.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just get together and talk about race and develop some understanding. And what I always have to tell people is that when you begin to talk about race, especially if it's cross-cultural,
Mm-hmm.
you are asking or you are inviting 400 years of charge to come into the room. And most times, especially in most DEI practices, there has not been built a container that can hold the charge.
Yes.
So that charge ends up coming into the room and then blowing through bodies of culture. White bodies end up with some type of enlightenment or some type of epiphany or something. Black bodies and indigenous bodies and brown bodies end up leaving that situation, experiencing extraction.
Mm.
And it's because we think that conversation and cognition is what will help us. And we don't really, let me just say this.
Mm-hmm.
Most white bodies that are on this call right now came from white bodies that were fleeing something,
Mm-hmm.
are descended from white bodies that were fleeing something. But just pause on that for a second. Most white bodies that are on this call are descended from white bodies that were fleeing something that never got dealt with. And then elite white bodies offered poor white bodies the chance to be something else than the bodies that were fleeing. And when white bodies start to begin to see themselves as white, at that moment, they begin to cleave themselves away from others, cleave themselves away from humanity. So part of the work is, how do white bodies begin to develop a culture that can actually help them reclaim the parts of humanity that they gave away in order to accept whiteness?
Mm-hmm.
Those types of conversations usually don't take place in DEI trainings.
Yes.
Those conversations involve people being intimate with each other, white bodies being intimate with other white bodies. And when I say intimacy, I'm not talking creepy stuff, right? When I say intimacy, I'm saying letting other bodies know you behind your eyeballs and keep doing it for the rest of your life around race specifically. So
Yes. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you. In your book, you offer these practices, these body practices, and I think what you started to mention just now kind of speaks to that practice and being in space with yourself, your body, and others. Can you just speak a little bit more to how essential the body is in this work and how we need to be accessing it and involving it?
Exactly. So the practices, so it takes on average for people to get through my books, either My Grandmother's Hands or my new one, The Quaking of America. It takes on average for people to get through that book 9 to 13 months. Because the books, you don't read my books, you do my books. And so you may start to read my books, stuff starts to get activated and you have to set it down.
Yes.
You may start to read my books, the stuff starts to get activated and you writing stuff in the margins and you fling it, right? You start to read most of the time when people tell me that they're reading my book, you see all kind of rips and tears and stuff in the margins and, post-its. And the reason is because it asks you to begin to slow down long enough to deal with the quaking that shows up in the body, the gnawing. When I tell people is that the gnawing that shows up in your body is actually an expression of health. It is not something that's going wrong. It is actually your body reminding you that something is askew that needs to be paid attention to. It is not about getting an answer. It is about, can you hold and sit with this a little bit longer and temper and condition your body to be able to withstand the charge that you're inviting in when you invite in race.
Mhm.
And so the practices really are about tempering and conditioning, right? Let me ask you a question, sis.
Yeah.
Have you ever been involved with any type of organized sports activity or any musicianship or artist or anything like that?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I played rugby for several years.
Okay. So I would venture to say, without knowing you, without me ever putting my eyes on you in my life, right?
Mhm.
I would venture to say that when you first started playing rugby, you sucked.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
like you were bad, right? Right. And what happened through the course of that is that something about the sport was attractive to you, or
Mhm.
something about the sport you wanted to excel in, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So even though you sucked, you kept getting practice.
Mhm.
You kept coming back. You kept getting in reps, right?
Mhm.
And then you had other people around you who might have had been in it a little while longer. They would say, hey, you might want to try this. I know you're doing that, but you might want to try this. You say, oh, let me try that. I like that. I don't like that. Right. And you begin to experiment. You begin to play.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And over time, what happens? You start to begin, and your body starts to begin to understand nuance,
Yeah.
vibe, shifts, meaning, urges, right? You begin to deal with it differently because you've gotten in enough reps, enough conditioning, enough tempering.
Mhm.
When I talk about somatic abolitionism, when I talk about race, when I talk about white body supremacy, the same thing holds. It is not enough for you to be intellectual about race if you haven't gotten your reps in. When you begin to speak about it, people will hear the inauthenticity because it is a vibratory piece, not just a cognitive piece.
Mhm.
And most people, especially white bodies, don't have any agility or efficacy when it comes to race collectively. So what they genuflect to is cognition,
Mhm.
or who they've read, or the fact that they read White Fragility or My Grandmother's Hands or watch Jane Elliott. You see what I mean? They genuflect to that, not to getting the reps in
Mhm.
specifically with other white bodies.
Mhm.
So when it comes to my work, I really try and tell people, this is a slow process, because the things that you genuflect to, like white comfort, like deference, like making sure that white people stay calm, like those types of things that get centered, you have to slow the process down, both individually and collectively, so you can begin to understand nuance and discernment. Otherwise, it comes off as inauthentic
Mhm. Mhm.
and performative.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. One thing that I think might come to mind for folks, and when we're talking about healing, is the ongoing presence of trauma. It's like the question of, how do we heal while actively being traumatized, and the continued existence of white-bodied supremacy. Do you have any thoughts or offerings around that?
Yeah.
Responses.
So when it comes to bodies of culture in general, and Black bodies specifically, one of the things that I say is that Black bodies do not deal with or experience, in its totality, post-traumatic stress disorder. I say we deal with pervasive and persistent traumatic stress disorder. There's a difference, right? Post would imply that it's over, that you're post, it's behind you. Pervasive and persistent would imply that it's continuing structurally, a manifestation, a daily manifestation, that people that look like you are a deviant from humanness structurally. So when I'm talking to Black bodies in particular, what I'm saying is, look, the first thing that has to happen is that we must contextualize this piece and understand that what we believe is happening is actually happening. That's the first thing. To actually say this thing, not this incident, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been saying to white bodies lately is, if you continue, and I'm talking to good white people right now, right? I'm talking to the good ones. If you continue to believe that these things are episodes, you are already behind the 8 ball. This is structural. What you saw on Saturday is connected to January 6th.
Yes.
What you saw in January 6th is connected to Kyle Rittenhouse. What you saw in Kyle Rittenhouse is connected to Dylan Ruth. What you saw in Dylan Ruth is connected to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. What you saw that happened to Breonna Taylor is connected to Rodney King. What you saw happen to Rodney King is connected to Emmett Till. What you saw happen to Emmett Till is connected to Carol Bryant. What you saw happen to Carol Bryant is connected to Tulsa. What you saw happen, you understand, that what happened in Tulsa is connected to enslavement. What you saw happen in the enslavement of Black people is connected to the genocide of indigenous people. What you see connected to the genocide of indigenous people is connected to land theft. What you see what I mean?
Yes.
Like, these are the things that we so often go, oh, that happened in the past. That has nothing to do with it. But the ramifications of it are, let me give you a quick example. Imagine being a 9-year-old little white boy, and your dad comes home, and you love your dad, and your little sister's sitting on the couch, and your mother's coming down the steps, and your dad says, everybody get your coats, we're going to the park. And you're like, really? And you're like, you jump in the car, and you get in the car, and you're going down, and it's a really good day. It's a bright day. It's a beautiful day. Your dad pulls in the park, and you notice that the park is filled with cars, and everybody's just having a good time. And you jump out, and you see your friends, and you see Mr. Johnson, who runs the bakery, and you see Mrs. Johnson, who runs the flowers, and you see the mailman, and you see your alderman, and you see the police officer. You see all of these people there, and it's a big park. One of the things, though, that's happening is that you smell something. You smell like barbecue. But you keep going on, and you keep playing, and you keep having fun. Then halfway through, your dad comes to get you. He has this big smile on his face. He looks bright, and he grabs your hand. He said, I want to show you something. Come with me. You're like, sure, Dad. And your dad walks you through this crowd of thousands upon thousands of people playing in the park. And he walks you through, and that barbecue smell is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And then all of a sudden, a whole section opens up, and you're standing there, and this barbecue is there, and you're smelling something, and you realize you're this little white boy, and your dad just took you to a lynching. $45,000 to 5,000 lynchings, documented cases of lynchings happened in this country. More than most of the time, thousands of people showed up to it. And that little white boy is sitting there with horror running and coursing through him. At the same time, it is sanctioned. That little boy grows up to be the 18-year-old shooter that goes to a predominantly Black area and shoots a civil rights leader and a grandmother and a police officer. That's the thing that white bodies have to begin to work with. not me, that. And how that got passed down over and over and over. And now trauma in a person over time decontextualizes trauma. Trauma in a person over time can look like personality. Trauma in a family over time can look like family traits. Trauma in a people can look like sanctioned culture. If it never gets examined and you never deal with the charge of that, it will become standardized and unexamined. And so when I'm talking about trauma, I'm not just talking about the trauma of the obvious trauma that I experience every day as a Black man, as a person in a Black body trying to navigate this. I'm also talking about the trauma that white bodies have been decontextualized from and have given part of their humanity to, and don't even know that they've done it.
Just checking in with my own body with that.
Beautiful,
that
beautiful,
offering. Thank you.
beautiful. How often do you hear when you go to a diversity training, people talking about it like this, with this charge? The charge is always there, but DEI was constructed to help white bodies stay in a room when charge comes up. It was constructed to help white bodies begin to learn glossary words and talk about implicit bias and all of that, right? But not deal with the charge of race and what it actually means and how it gets passed down. And so your pausing is beautiful. We have to pause because this stuff is right there. And we've figured out all different types of ways to go around it instead of going through.
This reminds me of in your work, how you refer to the existence of pain, right? And the difference of clean and dirty pain. Could you offer a little bit more around this pain and both those?
Absolutely. So let me ask it as a question. So sibling, have you ever been in a relationship with somebody that you probably shouldn't have been in a relationship with?
Yeah.
Right. But you
too much truth telling here.
but we didn't all had this experience. We didn't been with somebody, and our friends look at us like, why are you still with them? What is, why you still, and you can't explain it. You're just like, I don't know, but I'm staying, right? I'm a stay, right? That's dirty. There's something in you that is misaligned with that relationship, but you can't extricate yourself from it. You stay in it, but something about it, that's the gnawing, that's the health. That the gnawing says this ain't right, right? That's dirty pain. It's the pain of going around something as opposed to going through it, right? Clean pain is the pain when you go, I'm done. I'm not doing this no more. And you sitting there and the phone is ringing and that person is on the phone and you can watch it. And you're sitting there with your Merlot or your Boone From Strawberry or your TJ Smart or whatever it is, you sitting there with it, right? And you listening to some Prince, but you don't pick up the phone. It's painful, but it's cleaner. It has the ability to build more capacity, not now, but later. Dirty pain does not build capacity. It gets you around it as opposed to going through it. Both are painful. Clean pain is not without pain. They are both painful. As adults, we don't get a choice between pain and no pain. We usually get a choice between clean and dirty first. And what I say to the white community is you have chosen dirty so long that you think it is the correct way. It's being decontextualized and standardized for so long that you can now flip your dirty pain and make it about a political choice, and make it about a religious choice, and make it about a social choice, as opposed to no, it's just dirty. Especially when it comes to race.
I want to pivot a little bit to your newest work around Quaking of America, and it does seem indeed perfectly timed, offering for us to help navigate the widespread upheaval. Would you be willing to share a little bit about the Quaking of America and why it's so important to rebuild our culture?
Yeah. So I would suggest the rebuild our culture is actually the wrong way to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know how people keep saying we keep having this divide in our country, and we got to get back to when we were once together. When was that? When was that? We have less than 3% of the population of this country is indigenous. Just think about that for a minute. Less than 3% of the country we now know as America has indigenous people in it. Something happened and continues to happen. Land theft is gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching to the indigenous people. And it came with veracity, feralness, and brutality. So this idea that we're going to quote unquote come back together is really an overture towards comfort. It is not a real structural switch and change and a leaning into reclaiming our humanity. That's not what it is. It's a kind of a language nomenclature that we use when we are uncomfortable. Let's get back together. Let's stop the divide. Well, the divide has always been there. And so in the Quaking of America, I had originally started working on a sequel to My Grandmother's Hands. It was going to be called Our Grandchildren's Souls. It was going to be about how do you pass legacy down, a living embodied anti-racist legacy. Let me say one more thing about that. For white folks, because a lot of white bodies a lot of times don't have a lot of agility or efficacy when it comes to race collectively, they substitute that for niceness and kindness. Niceness and kindness is cool. I don't want you to spit in my face. I don't want you to spit in my soup. But that is not adequate for what we are seeing, the carnage that we are seeing. Your niceness and your kindness is inadequate. It's nice, but inadequate to address the carnage, right? Your niceness and kindness is not the same thing as ushering in and developing a living embodied anti-racist culture, not strategy, culture, right? That does not exist among the white community. Collectively, a living, embodied, anti-racist culture does not exist, right? And so for me, this idea of January 6th was really about, so I started writing Our Grandchildren's Souls, and then I started watching what happened on January 6th. And as I'm watching what's happening on January 6th, 1,000 people are there at first, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching and I'm going, wow, ain't nobody doing nothing. Nobody's doing anything,
Yeah.
right? And then I start seeing symbols, what I call symbols of our feral past, right?
Yep.
Have you ever been to, most of the time, if you go to a birthday party or a
Mhm.
family function, usually nooses don't show up to those things,
Mhm.
right? Nooses don't usually show up to things like this,
Mhm.
right? When nooses start to show up, you
Mhm.
are starting to begin to see symbols of the unhealed um, tragedy and brutality and carnage of America. The noose is a very potent feral system or feral symbol, right? Nobody goes to a birthday party with a noose.
No.
So when it shows up, you know there's feralness afoot, right? Then the next symbol that started to show up was the gallows, but they started erecting the gallows. Usually those things don't show up at a wedding, right? Then the next symbol that started to show up was the swastika and the Auschwitz sign.
Mhm.
Like, oh, we're going all the way into it now, right? And now you got 4,000 or 5,000 people with AR-15s and army fatigue and army and cosplay, right? Now you're seeing all of that. And then they started kicking out the doors and the windows, right? And nobody died.
Yeah.
Police officers died.
Mhm.
Police officers got stomped.
Mhm.
But the people that were there, that's why I stopped using the term white privilege. I don't use the term white privilege anymore. In a society that's constructed on the white body deeming and has deemed itself the supreme standard by which all bodies humanity shall be measured structurally and philosophically, it is not a privilege to be white. It is an advantage to be white. In a situation like that, all of those bodies understood the advantages of being white. Had that been 6,000 indigenous, Black, and brown bodies and Asian bodies kicking out the Capitol doors and windows, we all see, and we all know this to be true. It's not like I'm coming up with some, we all know this to be true. How often do you hear white bodies coming to grips with that with each other? Not me, not Resmaa coming in, not the Black guru coming in, not the Black therapist coming in. White bodies getting into a room, committing to each other and saying, for the rest of our lives, we're going to keep coming back to this room. For the rest of our lives, we're going to investigate this. For the rest of our lives, we're going to interrogate this. And we're going to do it so we can pass down more room and more space to our white children. You don't hear that. And so for me, the quaking of America was my attempt to put a pin in something and say, America, if nothing else, has amnesia with things that make it nervous. And I knew that was going to happen. I knew most white folks were going to get shocked and not have that shock make them go and learn more, make them go and sit more, make them go and grab other white bodies, make them go and get weapons trained, make them go and understand that those white bodies will murder you too. But whiteness has confused the good white body and the good white people to think that there's nothing to be done. If you looked at right now, January 6th was an attempted coup of this country. By the way that you see Americans acting right now, could you tell that that was an attempted coup? That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. And so the quaking of America was my attempt to say, I wanted to put a pin in it and say, if you are not preparing for what you're seeing, you are not learning the right lessons from what you're seeing.
Thank you. So I'm taking a peek at the time, and I know we're rapidly coming close to the 45 cutoff, and it never seems like enough time to have these deep conversations. So appreciate all that you've shared already. I want to offer up a question that we received in the chat. that came through just for more of a clarifying question.
Yeah.
Someone asked, is experiencing clean pain an example of the reps you talked about earlier?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Anybody that's experienced clean pain, like when I was saying earlier about choosing somebody that's not good for you, right? And being with somebody that's not good for you. The reason why that's important is because as you get older and as you begin to experience that over and over and over again, one of the things that happens is you start to begin to understand the nuance of what you're attracting and what you're picking up on without overriding. Right? That's the beauty of the clean, is that the clean begin the reps and the practice begins to say, oh, I didn't even know that was there. I didn't even know I was attracted to that. Oh, cool. Right? And it's a brutal realization, but it's the realization of growing the hell up. Right? Some of us get older and some of us grow up. Right? And so I talk a lot about this. So if people are wanting to know more, they can go to resmaa.com, resmaa.com. I do what's called a foundations course, a somatic abolitionist foundations course. And it gives people the basics of what some of the stuff that I'm talking about and how trauma shows up in the body. White body supremacy is trauma. It is traumatizing, right? And so, and then, I give a lot of free content out on my social medias, on Instagram and stuff like that. So if people are wanting to know more about the work, pick up the books first, and then, reach out.
Thank you. And I think you shared when you first jumped on that you're planning to be in the Pacific Northwest here coming up.
In June 20th. So if they get on my social media, the exact dates on where I'm going to be will be on there. So I announce it through my social media. So I'm going to be in Portland, in Seattle. I think the latter part of June.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So one last thing, maybe to close us out as it relates to the Pacific Northwest and something that you mentioned earlier. We have something in the Northwest called like Northwest Nice. And
the same as Minnesota Nice.
Is it same as Minnesota Nice? Okay,
yeah.
So it's just not unique to us. But I guess just one like closing out thing around, nice is, you said nice is inadequate, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Niceness is white people's way of saying, oh, I'm really sorry. My hearts and prayers go out to you. That's white people's, but not creating culture. Right? And what white people have started to, what's starting to become more apparent, I think, is that that's not going to get it anymore. That it's simply not. The bottleneck is getting too tight for white people, right? And what you're starting to see is that either white bodies are going to begin to develop a living embodied anti-racist culture that they can literally pass down to generations, the same way that somebody passed that down to that boy who did that in Buffalo, and passed it down to the boy who did that in what Dylan Ruth did, as well as the people who destroyed Tulsa and Oklahoma and Black Wall Street and 30 other Black cities, right? That there is a pass down. It is not, whiteness is not without cost to white people. And white people have got to begin, and I'm not talking about DEI. DEI is surface. It is surface. It is not depth. And these pieces around engaging your body, and just like what you did earlier, you said, I need to pause. Beginning to work that stuff is not performative. It is gnawing. It is work. Is it a work of growth? And if you don't do it, then you keep thinking that nice is enough.
Yeah. Thank you. So I know we're at 12:45. I did see, if you wouldn't mind dropping, oh, perfect. Someone dropped your Instagram handle. That was a request.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Resmaa, for joining us to Virtual Spokane. It was a gift. I look forward to future opportunities of interfacing. I think we have So folks, please show Resmaa a virtual love, those emojis, reactions. Let's get those populated. And I, again, want to thank our partners, Better Health Together, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Providence, and the Smith Barberry Progressive Fund, and the United Way and Accelerate Success team for making this conversation happen, and for all of you for joining. Thank you all. Be well. Remember, nice is inadequate. And so let's work on that. Thanks, everyone.